On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, protesters board the motor vessel Cape Orlando, and the crew, Coast Guard, and the police have to repel borders. I'm your host, Al Mercogliano. So that's not a thing you hear too often, repel borders, but in this case, it happened in the Port of Oakland, where the motor vessel Cape Orlando, one of 48 vessels in the U.S. Department of Transportation's Ready Reserve Force, was attempting to activate sail up to Tacoma, Washington for further orders. Now, the allegation was by the group there, which was a anti-war Israel, they're flying Palestinian flags group, was that this ship was going to go load equipment and ammunition for Israel, and therefore they tried unsuccessfully to stop the vessel from sailing. We're going to look at that event and also talk a little bit about what is Cape Orlando and how does it fit into the overall military structure. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. The amount of misinformation about this ship is epic. So let me clarify a couple of things about this. So this ship was built in Sweden in 1980. It's the former motor vessel American Eagle. In 1994, the U.S. government, as part of the post-Desert Storm, Desert Shield buildup, bought about a dozen roll-on, roll-off ships. That's the type of vessel this is. Roll-on, roll-off, referring to the fact that you drive cargo on and off. It's a series of big parking decks. The bridge is all the way forward on the left side of the screen here, and then the stern ramps back here is where you load it. This ship became part of the Ready Reserve Force. This is a force of vessels that can be activated within 5 days, crewed up. There's a minimal crew on board, about 9 to 10 people, and then you crew it up to full capacity, about 30 people. Identify these ships very easily because they're gray, but they also have that red, white, and blue stripe around the smokestack. So this ship entered the Ready Reserve Force in 1994. It's 635 feet, can carry about 20,000 tons of cargo, or specifically about 92,000 square feet of roll-on, roll-off equipment, and about 300 containers, TEUs, on board. And these ships are stationed along the coast of the United States. About a third of the vessels are on the East Coast, a third on the Gulf Coast, and a third on the West Coast. And Cape Orlando, along with several other vessels, are stationed in around Oakland, San Francisco Bay. Recently been used earlier this year in an exercise, so she'd already been tested, and now she is being activated. Now, according to the demonstrators, who were pro-Palestinian, they received word that this ship was going to sail to Tacoma, Washington, and then load equipment and ammunition to sail to Israel. Now, number one, the crews that were being activated for this vessel would come out of the union halls. This ship is operated by Patriot, and they use master mates and pilots. There's a whole series of unions they would use. And so the sailing of the ship is not confidential. It's not secret. You have to go to the union hall and advertise this, and you have to kind of specify where the ship is going. In this case, it was identified going up to Tacoma, Washington, and then on an international voyage. Because when you sign your shipping articles as a merchant mariner, this ship is crewed by civilian merchant mariners, not Navy personnel, not military personnel, but civilians. You have to identify where the ship is going because you sign on for a voyage from the start of the port. When you return back to the port, that's when you get off. And it usually will have a estimate about how many days you're going to be out for. And right now, what we're seeing is Cape Orlando was able to depart the port. This is marine traffic showing the ship underway. It departed from Alameda, initially went out into the bay to anchor. It would have to test lifeboats and a few other tests before it got underway, and then departed from San Francisco and now is heading north, heading up to Tacoma. This is the Port of Oakland where Cape Orlando sailed from. You can see the track line right here. This is the Maersk terminal, and you can see how containers and container cranes are right here. If you zoom in just a little bit here, one of the things that is of a lot of question that's raising them is how protesters not just got to the demonstration outside. This area is fenced off, but they broke through the fence and got onto the grounds of the port. Understand something. It is extremely difficult to get onto a port. Today, to get on any port in and around the United States, you need what's called a TWIC card, a Transportation Workers Identification Card. TWIC cards are difficult to get, and you are not supposed to be on there. There's a security issue here. Now, ships in the Ready Reserve Force are not Navy vessels, so security is a lot less than what you would have around a Navy vessel. However, they are used for surge sea lift. In other words, these are the ships that would carry the military's cargo over in case of war. So they are a potential target. And the fact that these protesters not only were outside the gate, but penetrated the gate, got alongside the vessel to a point where they were able to climb onto the accommodation ladder. That was the ladder that you use to bring the pilot on board and then secure themselves to it, is a major security problem. The question I have is, where was port security? Where was the Coast Guard? Where was DOT? Where was anyone that was meant to keep these people away from the ship? If I'm on the ship, I would, of course, bring up the gangway, secure the vessel so that you can go. But you have to embark the pilot, and you have to put that pilot ladder down to get the pilot on board. And it looks like that the demonstrators got on board, climbed up onto the pilot ladder, and then secured themselves to the pilot ladder. And that's what delayed the vessel from sailing. But they never should have been on the pier in the first place. That is a failure in security in this area. That's something that's going to have to be looked at. These ships are under the Department of Transportation, the Ready Reserve Force, the Maritime Administration, and this ship was involved in a DoD, Department of Defense mission. And the fact that this is impacted is severe. Now, the 3 people, there's a debate here whether it's 3 or 4 people. Some reports say 3, some say 4, were apprehended and arrested. What they're going to be charged with is, at very least, trespassing, breaking and entering, illegal presence on board a government facility. There was an allegation about piracy. I don't know if you can allege piracy because they weren't doing, and I'm not kidding, any piratical behavior. Piratical behavior meaning you're trying to steal, commandeer, take over the ship. It's not clear they were trying to commandeer or take over the ship. They seemed to be intent to delay or prevent the sailing of the vessel. Not sure if they did any damage. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Coast Guard and the federal authorities really handle this situation regarding the trespassers on board. Obviously, you're allowed to protest. Your First Amendment right. You can protest whether I agree with you or not. However, you're not allowed to infringe on the movement of vessels. And most importantly, you're not allowed to trespass. And they trespassed not just on the terminal where all the protesters were. That's trespassing. And then you had the ones who boarded the vessel illegally. So I talked about the fact that there are 48 vessels in the Ready Reserve Force. These are the 48 vessels. There is a great number of them that are out right now on assignments. These ships are used to either redeploy military forces. There's a rotation of military forces out there, so these ships will be used along with commercial vessels when they're available to redeploy forces. And then sometimes they're also used to forward deploy equipment, replenish stocks and supplies. So, for example, looking at this map right here, you see one of the large medium-speed ro-ros, the motor vessel Fisher, is out in the Pacific right now. There are actually 4 vessels in and around the Mediterranean right now. 3 of the roll-on, roll-off ships, the Cape Texas, the Cape Wrath, the Cape Vincent, and 1 crane ship. This is a container ship with these very large cranes on board. It's a self-sustaining container ship. The Cornhusker State is in the Mediterranean. Now, before you jump to the gun here and start talking about Israel and Hamas, we do a periodic rotation of 3 brigades every 6 months out in Europe. Plus, we are repositioning equipment and military supplies around the planet. So those roll-on, roll-off ships, the 3 Cape ships, are probably moving elements of brigades into Eastern Europe on their routine rotations. Cornhusker State has been being used. We've seen crane ships being used to shuffle ammunition between war stocks and pre-positioning sites around the world. Cornhusker State does not have an ID where she's heading yet right now, but it looks like she's heading for the Suez Canal and heading through that way. And then you have ships all along the East Coast, Gulf Coast, and West Coast of the United States that we talked about. Now, the idea that Cape Orlando is going to go up to Tacoma, load equipment and ammunition for Israel, I think is very doubtful for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is that ship then is going to have to sail to Israel, which means it's either going to have to sail westward out of out of the West Coast, across the Pacific, through the through the South China Sea, through the Malacca Straits, through the Bab el Mandab, up the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, and get to Israel. Well, that's a very high tension route right now. There's we just had the missile shoots in the Red Sea. I doubt they'll go that way. Plus, it's really expensive. You got to pay for a Suez Canal toll. If the vessel heads to Israel, the eastern route's got to go through the Panama Canal. Panama Canal, that's another toll they'll have to pay. Plus, we're seeing low water in the Panama Canal. If you were going to load equipment and stores for Israel, you would probably do it on the east and Gulf Coast and sail it that way, not through the Suez or Panama Canal. But again, allegedly, the protesters had word that's what was going on with this ship. I don't think they know that at all. I don't think anyone would have told them that. I think, if anything, they heard this ship is going to Tacoma, and then they made an inference. So this is the Ready Reserve Force, a fleet created in 1977 after the end of the Vietnam War. One of the things we found at the end of the Vietnam War was we were dependent on the U.S. Merchant Marine initially to carry over the equipment to Vietnam in 1965. However, the U.S. Merchant Marine wanted to get back on its commercial routes, and so what was needed was a fleet of vessels that were specifically configured to surge and sustain over the Merchant Marine in Vietnam. And so the original plan was to create a fleet of about 30 Victory ships. These were leftover World War II ships. But instead, what we started doing was taking vessels that had been built under subsidies in the United States in the period post-World War II, and as they were getting older, put them in the Ready Reserve Force. It morphed and changed over time. After the Persian Gulf War, there was a need to put more of these roll-on, roll-off ships in them. And now what you see is a fleet that consists of 42 roll-on, roll-off ships, 4 crane ships, and 2 aviation repair ships. These are like tenders for the U.S. Marine Corps. And these ships, again, are stationed along the East Gulf and West Coast of the United States, can be operated and activated in 5 days. Critically essential for military plans. The problem with these ships is this: the average age of the vessels are 44 years old. They're extremely old vessels. There's a program to replace them, to buy used ships and put them in. That's what was done back in 1994 with the Cape Orlando. Now you see a new program doing that. They have added 5 ships to the Ready Reserve Force. 2 of them, however, were already 25 years old, and the 3 most recent ones that are currently being reflagged are just 10 years old, but they are expensive. The 2 25-year-old ships cost about $25 million a piece. They've been in the Ready Reserve for over a year. However, they have yet to be reflagged into the U.S. flag. Even though they were flying a U.S. flag, the Coast Guard has not issued a new certificate of inspection for them, and therefore they're unavailable. The 3 new ships that came over from the Italian registry are being reflagged, but they're extremely expensive. We paid between $90 to $110 million a piece for those vessels. We paid more for the vessels when they were 10 years old than the company who had them built paid for them. That is a friggin' problem right there. Anyway, a little bit of information here for you about the boarding of the Cape Orlando. Question's going to be, do they do the same thing up in Tacoma? The ship is heading to Tacoma, should be in Tacoma by either Sunday or Monday this week. This is the first week of November. The ship will be loading out of Tacoma. They'll be using the port facilities up there. I would envision that port security is going to be a little bit tougher than it was down in Oakland. We know of issues in and around the Bay Area regarding police and security. I hopefully will see a little bit stronger, especially if military equipment is being loaded in. I envision Cape Orlando's going either for an exercise out in Eastern Asia, Middle East perhaps, or it's part of a redeployment of military forces to Korea or the Middle East. That's what I envision that they're actually using Cape Orlando to. As soon as we find out, we'll be sure to post it, update it in the show notes down below. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a big thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, you can hit that super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly patron or yearly patron subscriber. Until our next video or the next time a ship is boarded, this is Sal signing off.